Hello, welcome to this course lesson understanding the for statement in JavaScript. Now, the for statement is used to declare a function scoped variable or a globally scoped variable. Now, to declare a var statement, we use the var keyword, then followed by the variable name and the value. Now, the value is optional, and the default value of a var statement is undefined. So if we don't initialize the var statement, name here becomes undefined. Now, whenever we declare a var statement, the variable of the var statement becomes globally scoped or function scoped if it is declared inside a function. Now, let's see an example. If we have a scope here and we declare a statement using var. Now, as we declare and initialize a var age variable here. Now, this age variable exists inside this scope, inside this block scope of this if condition, and also it will be available in the global scope. But in the global scope, age will be undefined. So, if we log age, let's remove this. So you see, it will be undefined. It will not throw reference error, but it will be undefined. And then we can also initialize it here, and then we will still get the same value. It will not throw initialize. It will not throw reference error. So whenever we use the var to declare a variable, it will still go up to the global scope of that variable and declare that variable. So in this case, we can still get the variable there. Now, if we had declared this variable with the let keyword, this will only be available inside this scope. It will not be available outside. So you see, it will throw reference error that age cannot be out. We cannot reference it outside it, outside of this. Now, let's see what happens when we declare a var variable in a block scope. Like this, we have a block scope with name John. Now, with this, we can access the name var outside of this block scope. This is a block scope, and in as much as this variable is declared with var and is inside this block scope, it creates this name, this variable name, outside of its block scope, which is the global scope. So we can still access this name outside of this block scope like this. So we can still access it. Now, if we change it to let, we can't be able to access it. It will throw reference error, meaning that this was not defined anywhere in this global scope. Now, let's look at when we use the var keyword when using the for loop or any blocking statement. For example, let's look at the for loop. Now, let's say we declare the var keyword and use it to hold the iteration of I. Now, this var and this variable I exist within the scope of this for statement, but we can also access var I outside of it. Now, see that during this iteration, the var I takes the current value of this expression or this increment. So let's say it increments it to 9, or when it reaches 10, this doesn't log again. Now, outside of its scope, this var I takes the last reference or initialization or whatever, or the last value of this expression here becomes the value of this variable I. Now also we can also get it or access this variable I because it was declared with this var keyword. So now this the value of this I will become the value of the last expression of this before this for statement exists or stops execution. Now, so you see it. Or let's remove for better clarity. Let's remove this inner log. So you see this execution stopped at 10 and the assignment of var was at 10. So after the execution of this for statement, in the environmental scope or in the global scope, we can still access this I, and this I will become the latest value this was set to before the for loop concluded. So which was 10, and that's why we were able to access I here without reference error and get the latest value, which is 10. If we had set let here, it will throw reference error. That means we cannot reference I outside of the global scope because let is only declared within a block scope. So that's why it is advisable to use let here instead of var so that we cannot access it outside of the parent scope or outside of the block scope. Now the same goes with for off. Let's say we have an array of fruits, orange. Now we can access these fruits outside of this for off statement because the fruit is declared using the var keyword, so we can still access it like what we saw in the last traditional for loop. So the value of this fruit outside of this scope will be the last value of the item in this array, which is orange. So this fruit will log orange. So you see that the var keyword, wherever it is declared, it is accessible outside of that block scope, provided it is not a function scope. Now also, if we declare a var variable like this, and we come and declare it again inside a block scope, now we can access it here outside. Now, but the value of it here now outside will not be 90, it will be 100. Yeah, because whenever we declare a variable with the var keyword inside a block scope, it will still append it in the global scope. Yes, so with the value. So here it will make age now to have 100 instead of 90. So you see it. So now we should be very careful whenever we are using var so as not to change the value of what we have outside of the scope, especially in the block scope. Now let's look at what happens when we declare a variable with the var keyword inside a function. Now let's call this function x. Then inside this function we have full. Now inside this function we declare the variable full with the var keyword. Now, unlike the block scope that we saw previously, this full is not accessible outside of this function scope, just like we declared uh, in the beginning of this course that var keyword only creates variables that are globally scoped or functionally scoped. So this variable full it's only available in this function and in other child global scopes or functional scopes inside this function. Now we cannot access it outside here. Let's try it and see. You see, it throws reference. But if it was a in a in a block scope, we could have we would have received or logged this full here. So we could have it's accessible here if it was a block scope, but because it's a function scope, it is no longer accessible outside of the parent scope or in the global scope at all. So, but if we have a function y and we declare a variable using the var keyword bars, now we can access this full variable inside the y function, but we cannot access this bar variable outside of this y function. That means inside of this x function, and we can also not access these bars outside in the global scope. So this full fails also, and this bars fails also. Now we can access this full variable inside this y function, but we cannot access the bars function. It will throw reference error. Now let's run it. To run it, first we have to call the x function now, and inside here we need to call the y function here. So we see console.bars on verse 12, it says reference error. So we cannot reference these bars. So now let's remove it because we cannot reference it. So now let's clear our console and now see again what happens. So we have seen that we cannot reference bars because it's functionally scoped inside this, even though it was declared using the var keyword. Now let's run it again. Now see that the bars here cannot be referenced at all because it is declared inside this function y, and then when var is only scoped inside this function or inside the function, so it cannot be accessed outside the function. So this throws a reference error. Now let's clear the console and see the last. Now you see now the last one full, yeah, succeed because this function y is a parent of this function x and declared with var, so we can see it in the child function y. So that's why we are able to reference the full here, and it will log the value without throwing the reference error. So this is how var works inside functions. So to recap it again, var, when variables created with the var keyword inside a function only exist inside that function. It cannot exist outside that function, or we cannot reference it in the global scope. It only exists inside the function. Now, a variable declared with the var keyword inside a child function only exists inside that child function. We cannot reference that variable outside of the parent function or in the global scope. Now we can declare duplicate variables using the var keyword and it will work. For example, we say var x equals to 9. Now let's console log it. Then we can also make a var declaration of the same x 6 and it will work. Here in this case it will print 6. Now let's run it. So you see it will work. So what happens here, we declare the variable x with the var keyword, yeah, and now we declare the same variable. So we have duplicate variable declaration, or we can call it redeclarations. It works also in var. Just what JavaScript will do here is just to replace this x in the variable table with the new value 6. Now if we change this to let, we'll have an error. Identifier has already been declared, so we have a duplication variable error. And also if we use const we'll have the same result. So you see syntax error. Identifier X has already been declared. So that's all for the var statement. I hope you understood everything about var and the differences between var, let, and cost. Thank you so much. Hit the like button and I will see you in the next video. Bye.